Um, Hi, John. My name is Shivani. I am a Polar Digital Editorial Fellow, currently curating an emergent conversation on sociopolitical discourse in sustainable urban mobility. So, the series aims at exploring anthropological or interdisciplinary questions of what sustainable mobility is in the urban area. And this emergent conversation found its essence in the many discussions that I had with the bicycling research project team at IIT Delhi and U Chicago, and in attempt to understand bicycling culture, bicycling cities in the global south. And I welcome you to become this part of this conversation. So thank you for joining me for this Q&A session on your book, Mumbai on Two Wheels. I got to know about you through your seminar paper that I read for my master's dissertation. Is there culture of the Indian street? And while reading the book, I went back to that time, like when I was writing my dissertation, and how it motivated me to look at uh, from that perspective and move into the anthropology of urban mobility and how far I have come in the last couple of years. And thank you so much for that paper as well. And I really love the book, the writing style, and I saw every word and description, thinking about similar conversations I had with people when I was doing my fieldwork in Pune as well. Your book, Mumbai on Two Wheels, Cycling, Urban Space, and Sustainable Mobility, is a strong ethnography with rich descriptions, broader engagement with the themes, broad the urban dynamics in Mumbai. That also provides an alternative method of doing research. It is critical and deep, and I really enjoyed the book as it shaped itself with conversations between big infrastructure, micro infrastructures, everyday life of city, and the people bringing out the nuances, intricate nuances in it. And I would like to begin our conversation with why Mumbai. And I am really curious to know about how you took that research as a student coming from like a place where I've only done a couple of research field works, and to get to know the decade of work that you have done so far, how you went into it, how you kept yourself motivated about it, and all the methodologies that you rejected and then went for, and the back and forth between the field work and then doing every other thing that could be like added into this sphere of Mumbai on two wheels.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, I mean, thank you so much for the kind words about this book, and also for the kind words about that seminar article that was, I think, published back in 2012. And so it's nice to hear that that's still circulating and you found it useful. And it's a good reminder too that I'm sure there are some like resonant, similar themes in that article, and also found in this book. So to answer your question, why Mumbai? This is just for the people watching this. I mean, this is the second book that I've written based in Mumbai. It's the first. It's called The Slow Boil, and it's on street food, public space, and rights in Mumbai. And that was based on my PhD research on street vending, specifically unlicensed street vendors and how they maintain access to the side of the road in Mumbai. And so I've had I've had over 2 decades or more, and I've been both visiting Mumbai and then also in 3 different 1-year stints living for 1 year at a time since the year 2000. So it's a city that I'm constantly coming back to, and it's a city that I love being in, and clearly I also love writing about. And so for the studying of cycling in particular in Mumbai, it's what motivated this project was I saw an increase in the growth of cycling, but also in the city, and this is back at the end of when I was finishing up my first book. But I was also interested in how doing ethnography on mobility after a first book, which was entirely on people not moving. It was really on a core part of that book on street vending was about how they assert rights to space, but really by not moving at all. So that's really what led me to thinking more in terms of the cycling aspect. And in terms of so you've asked also regarding why cycling in Mumbai. So often people ask me, why, and I often hear like over the course of the years of doing this research, why research cycling and then why research cycling in Mumbai in particular. I mean, there's like, for every question like that, I have a personal and more formal professional answer. I mean, the personal question is, honestly, I find it just personally very, very interesting. Like, and there's this incredibly rich, dynamic world of cycling. It's incredibly eclectic and diverse. And then once you just scratch the surface, from the very first day of doing research for this, I mean, the goal of this project book, the research was, I mean, from the very beginning wanted to talk with anybody who had anything to do with cycling in Mumbai. So that ranged from people cycling for fun, people cycling for work, or in all the different spectrum in between that, because there's, as I talk about in the book, it's not such a clear binary sometimes. I also talked to bicycle mechanics, repair people, people in the industry, planning, etc. And from the first day, I saw that people who cycle in Mumbai, everyone has a wonderful, a really incredible story. And at the simplest level, like that's the goal of my book, was just to show the things people are doing with cycles in Bombay, as well as all the various meanings that a bicycle can have. And then secondly, like on the question of why Mumbai is that why cycling Mumbai is that in the kind of literature around the world on cycling, on sustainable cities, cities outside of Europe and North America are not covered very well in the literature. And there's definitely some really important work out there, but often the assumption is that the focus should be on cities like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, which have done amazing, like they have done amazing jobs increasing, like just making cycling a norm, and 50% ride share and all that. And so as a result, there's an assumption that, well, cities like Mumbai are, it's only a place of, only framed in terms of the negative, like as a problem. Sometimes there's no, but in terms of like lack of policy, lack of infrastructure. And so the goal of my book was to just not to say there's no problem, but to say before we get to the issue of identifying any solutions or even the problems, we should begin with the question of what are people actually doing on a bicycle, and how are they navigating the city on two wheels.
Your book, it had hooked me from the word kryptonite you log. The moment I read it, I was like, oh, it's going to get interesting now. And the introduction was really a roller coaster ride, I would say. The moment you had started with sociality of mobility, and then moved to people as infrastructure, reference of Abdul Malik Simon. And then I was like, it's getting interesting because I, as a student, have read all these papers, and then I'm reading these references again and again in the scholarship of urban anthropology. Uh, you also recently mentioned in a podcast episode with Sneha about you commented on the relationship between your two books, Slow Boil and Mumbai on Two Wheels, how people inhabit space. How would you say the ride to the city through cyclist perspective come about in your findings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest, I didn't explicitly use that phrasing of right to the city in this book, but you're absolutely right to mention it, because that was a very important part of my first book. And so when we think about rights to the city, it's that often what does that mean, right? That means the ability of people to make a claim on the city, the ability of people to not just, maybe if often it's informal, maybe they're not officially a part of the policy apparatus or the government, but they're still changing and transforming the city and asserting, if anything, a right to live in the city and to make it their own. So, and in that sense, that question of like right to the city in that informal way emerges in the presence of so many, like the physical presence of people cycling, like in mass, like in a large numbers or in groups, which transforms the environment, the streetscape, and normalizes the presence of cycling in Mumbai. So, and this is what I highlight in the book, is that one of the positives, and again, like I emphasize the positives because that's often ignored. Usually cycling in Mumbai is framed only in negative terms. And so one of the positives is that people who are driving expect a lot on the street. They expect a variety of vehicles, users, behaviors. And one of those things is expectation of people on a bicycle. It's just not seen as like a weird thing. And so I think that maybe it's tangential, but I think that's the closest this book comes to the question of rights to the city. And so when you have large groups of people who are cycling, especially, like like, of course, the Dabbawalas, but also the other delivery people, the bread, the book I talk about people delivering bread and milk, early morning cycle. If you go out early in the morning, it does kind of become a cycling city very early, and in a sense that, and through that large numbers, they're going to have this ability of at least transforming the experience of the streets in the city.
You mentioned it very nicely that this book is about people enacting a cycling city now. Also, the book is showing how cycling intersects with the class and gender aspects as well, as you
Sure.
mentioned in chapter 2 about how
Sure.
gender makes a lot of difference when people are cycling. You gave an example of Firoza Shah as well as Veena, um, and these represents community identity, and how are these representing it in Mumbai cycling culture. And somewhere you also mentioned in the book that pandemic had brought a lot of attention to cycling. So what insights did you gain about how the bicycle culture is contributing to the social change in the Mumbai city, and how is it in the process of becoming?
Yeah, so let me answer the first part of the question about gender and community. And so the important point for any researcher, anyone researching cycling, is that you have to first acknowledge that there's no universal experience of someone cycling. Who you are, what body you have, what your gender is, race, ethnicity, caste, class, all that markers of our identity and our experience will shape our experience cycling. And this is not my original point. I mean, there's a whole literature that I mentioned in the book that really important that emphasizes this. Often it's in the field of like transportation justice in particular in North America, and also and in India. And the important point that all this literature is making, insisting on the importance of again, gender, race, caste identity, is as opposed to what's the alternative to that? Is the alternative is often the technical approach, which is saying that, well, it's just like the streets are divided between people who drive and people who cycle and people who walk. And no distinction is made about the people, like the differences within the people who are cycling, within people who are pedestrian, who are walking, which we all have very, very different experiences based on who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Firoza Shah is really a key figure in your book.
Mhm.
So I was thinking about in the lines like, how do you see her experiencing illustrating the ways in which academia and advocacy can complement each other with respect to your experiences as a researcher as well in the city,
Yep.
and how they complement each other in promoting the sustainable mobility, and what lessons from your and her experience can bridge help or can help bridge these two spheres to drive this social change effectively, because we all see the governance that is in the cities,
Yeah.
Indian
Yeah. Yeah.
cities.
Yeah. So yeah, so Feroza Dadan is that's her name, and she plays a very important role in the book and played a really probably even more important role in in the research as well. We we first met in June, in 2015 and so it started off with us, I would just do like a kind of more formal interview actually. But I knew from the beginning, like my goal is not just interviews, I want to ride with people. So I asked her, can we go for a ride together? And she said, sure. And then on that first ride together, then we just started, then that's was a much more interesting conversation because then we can talking about cycling while you cycle is ideal. And then from there, just I think in terms of a lesson, so over time, when you get to know someone well and you work closely with someone while you're doing research, is she saw like the more we met, the more she figured out like she got what I was what my research really is about. I mean, there's one thing to just you meet someone once and you of course ethically you have to explain your research, but there's always a limitation for how much people actually understand. But over time, then people really, really get it.
Right.
And she really got it. Like she got what I'm trying to do. And then it turned into more of a collaboration because we kind of both realized that our goals overlap, which was at the simplest level, like my goal and her goal was to just kind of get a sense of the cycling landscape of Mumbai. And so Firoza, just sorry, as a background, I should talk more about her, sorry, to give us background. So Firoza Dalden is probably the most important bicycle advocate in Mumbai, and certainly one of the most important in all over India. And she has been both cycling personally for decades, but really working in advocacy, promoting cycling in the city for, I don't know, more than 15 years. She has an organization now called Cycle Chala City Bacha, like Cycle and Save the City. And she does really amazing work. Like she does a lot of free bicycle giveaways. And that's actually why I was trying to raise money through the sale of this book, that the pre-orders was raising money to buy bicycles that we're going to give away for free. And she gives away bicycles for free to women who are domestic workers and also street vendors. And also she trains those women in turn train other women in their community to cycle. But she does many other kinds of advocacy work. She also meets with government officials, etc. So the key thing is, though, what she does, though, and what I was found like so inspiring by her work is she always told me like the most important thing that she does is to cycle. And she was all about action and not just about talk.
Yeah.
And she did talk a lot, of course, but she always told me like the most important thing I can do to make a change in this city is to cycle. And she said like she knows like as a woman, it's making also another claim, and she's also trying to normalize the presence of women cycling in Mumbai. And every time when I'm out with her, she would ride and she would start conversations, and we talk to people like at traffic stops, and that's how our work converged. And then also I did some research of some projects where like we would also map out routes of cyclists, and she said that didn't end up in the book, but she would then use that when she meets with government officials and other folks, she's always meeting people trying to talk about cycling, and the response almost always is, who cycles in Mumbai? No one really cycles here. This is not a cycling city. And she told me that she was able to use my research, and she would say, no, look, we actually have these maps, we have these people we've talked to, we have videos and actual evidence that people do cycle in the city. So kind of the takeaway is just try to, of course, you want to develop like you want to work, collaborate, like not just make a relationship where you're just interviewing someone, but actually working and collaborating, and try to find moments of overlap where like what are my research goals are overlapping with her advocacy goals, and that's the kind of ideal scenario for that partnership.
Moving
Yeah.
on to that, I also want to understand like what role do you think city policies play in shaping the sustainability of urban mobility in Mumbai, and how do you think government initiatives or the lack thereof they impacted the growth of cycling as a sustainable practice in the city?
No, and it's important to note that like the current development model for transportation is entirely car oriented. I mean, just all the money and the attention is. I mean, look at the coastal road. I mean, I as far as I understand, cyclists will not be allowed on it. It's entire um this is a massive project that's built for about like 2% of the population that commutes by vehicle, right? So in terms of policy implications, there are in the government. Okay, let's begin with the positive. Government initiatives that do work in India are the free bicycle giveaways
Yeah.
schemes. There's been some great recent research that's come out from IIT Delhi, and you should put a link to that wonderful article that came out about free bicycle programs, and I mean it's in Bihar, West Bengal, Maharashtra also has, I mean in many states, and it's been shown to really work and especially increase girls and young women cycling. I mean but the interesting thing is those schemes were implemented under education programs, not under transportation programs. But it doesn't matter. It's great. I mean, it works. That's wonderful. And that's often gets neglected. That often I mean, this is one of the points I make in the book is that whereas the typical solution when someone asks how do you increase cycling, the solution is always build a bicycle lane, and bicycle lanes when they work are really wonderful. And I've personally like benefited and experienced really great bicycle lanes. But on the other hand, when the conversation is only about that, it neglects many other topics, such as like giving away free bicycles. That if bicycle lanes are built, but then half the population can't afford to buy a bicycle, then there's really no point in those lanes. And then likewise, a big issue is bicycle storage, like secure storage, so bicycle parking, these kind of more smaller things. They're not the big dramatic, like they don't have that, I call it in the book, charisma. They're not like, they don't, look, bicycle parking doesn't really like look cool. You can't like, it's very humble.
Yeah.
Or just like I talk in the book, like smooth roads or like well-maintained roads. It's like, it's not the same charisma as a beautiful big bridge, right? And that's often why that aesthetic quality of infrastructure often dictates what gets built and what doesn't.
You kept on talking about the tensions between how when we see the surface and people are sensorially experiencing that, the
Mm,
surface pleasures talk when you mention it in your chapter. And
mm,
then there is also, you had a conversation with the planner officer there and how they looked at the city from the planning perspective. So how do you deduce cycling taking part in, shaping the narrative around urban planning governance? And where
yeah,
do you see anthropology playing a role in it?
yeah, yeah, I guess, yeah. So what ethnography offers, like what does ethnography and or anthropology offer, like a world of urban planning? I mean, right? And so we, at its ideal, ethnography we take for granted that people are experts of their own world.
Yeah,
And I saw that people who are cycling in Mumbai are they're experts on cycling, of course, but also on traffic. These are reading traffic every day. I mean, it's a survival question, really. And they have really very interesting. They have a theory of the city, and this is one of the core arguments of the book, is that people who are just ordinary people who are cycling in Mumbai have this nuanced understanding of the city that can benefit the urban planning profession or transportation planning world. And what I saw, and of course there are exceptions, but in general, like what I saw was in conversations that are focusing on transportation planning and policy, it often has this kind of aerial, like an aerial view, and you look at it's all, a lot of beautiful maps and diagrams,
yeah,
and kind of like that view from above thing, and which again it has its importance. But sometimes what you miss are the actual experiences of individuals, and again going back to the earlier question of individuals from different communities and backgrounds and experiences, how they actually use those spaces. And secondly, you're missing the detail, and really for cycling infrastructure or cycling safety and um, and uh, and just the experience of cycling, the details, like it really rests on the details. It's made or break by those details. And that's what the site, so then as anthropologists, what we're well suited to do is document how, like at that micro level, how are people who are cycling, how are they looking at the details of the city? What are the details of the city that matter to them? That might get lost when you have that like big overview map perspective. And as I discussed in the book, one of the big detail cyclists talk about are the consistency of the road surface and the small cracks, the potholes, the rubble, even just the fact that there are different kinds of surfaces. These are the things that you don't, if you're not cycling, you would never know that. Like I didn't know this. I didn't think about this even when I started this project. And when you're cycling, only when you're cycling, you're seeing the city differently. And it's very, very different than seeing the city from like that larger map perspective. So ideally, I mean, I actually, and this is that anthropology and urban planning have this like incredible potential for complementarity, because they're both have offering like really important but quite different sets of expertise and perspectives that I think together would be, are really magical.
I'm really interested to know where do you see Mumbai on two wheels, like with respect to that work, because it's an important body of work. And where do you see the future directions moving forward? How do you look at your work, reflecting upon the last decade that you have spent on this body of work? I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, it's great. No, it's a great question. I mean, so where I end the book is, yeah, I give just some a list of what are the implications, kind of our practical implications of this ethnography, hoping that others might take it up. And so because I do believe that policy and planning have a hugely important role in all this, and infrastructure as well. So, but I say like anything ideally in the future, it's just, well, first everything should start from the point that people who are already cycling are experts. And so I would just hope that if anyone is, creating a bicycle related project or policy, that they spend time really like listening and talk, both of course riding but also and also talking with other people who are cycling. That's just the very simple, like the basic beginning point. Um, and then secondly, it's, I mean, even more practically, when there's so much focus, there's a lot of focus on building and on physical design, especially like bike lanes, for instance, or
Yeah.
bike path, in fact. And if the products like that get discussed, and it's so important to focus not just on like on actually what it looks like, but things like how it's maintained, because that's often, that's what I saw, like why so many bicycle projects in India were built and then failed, is because they were not maintained ever. And then also, on top of that, it's also like equally important is identifying, well, what are the implications of these bike lane projects on other people who are currently using that space on the side of the road. This is another point I make in the book, is that often in like the examples of bicycle lane successes that are often used is like, let's say in the US or in Europe, when bike lanes are put in, it's replacing parked cars and vehicles. But often in India, when a bike lane is put in, the battle is like, maybe it's parked vehicles, but it's like auto rickshaw drivers or taxi drivers are using that space for them, relying on it for their livelihood. And then also for street vending, this goes back to like my first book, that street vendors also use that side of the road, and then also shopkeepers and all the other ways the side of the roads are used in many Indian cities. And so that's why I caution in the book that a bike lane, if it means evicting poor people and removing people from their ability to use the side of the road for their livelihood, it's not as, progressive and equitable as they're often made out to be, and might actually like further promote the like this kind of elite oriented planning in the city that
Yeah.
I assume everyone, we're all on board with in theory. So
Often I have like seen the couple of cities I have been to in India, like the bicycle lanes are actually put in place where people are using it for recreational purposes.
but right,
And
and that's, yeah.
yeah,
That creates this idea that reinforces this idea that cycling is just purely for
fun.
exercise or fun. Yeah, examples of people like putting their bike in a car, driving to the lane, and then cycling, and that's I mean that's like, it's fine. It's just that can't be the center of our discussions around cycling. Like, I'm not saying that can't ever exist, but that shouldn't be the go-to for when we think about improving or increasing cycling. It should be focusing on incorporating cycling as among many. I mean, the key thing is like, it has to be see cycling as among many options. Nobody just cycles, just like nobody just walks. The idea is
Yeah.
you take a bus, train, walk, cycle, and drive, and ideally, people have access to all those options.
And you're also part of a bicycling research project currently. And could you do comparisons and similarities from your experiences in Mumbai and other global south cities for where sustainable mobility dialogue is moving ahead in these cities of global south? And
So I think you're referring to my collaboration with um uh, Rahul Goyal and Kavibala Smriti Kannan, right, and at IIT Delhi and University of Chicago, and that's really focusing on Delhi and Dhaka. And we're putting together, very excited, we're putting together a cycling in South Asia conference in Delhi. Just want to put a little plug out for that. If
yeah,
any cycle researchers out there, there's a call for papers for poster presentations and film screenings. So we encourage everyone to submit their work. Our part of our goal is to showcase new research that's on cycling in South Asia. And you mentioned, across other cities. I mean, certainly, I mean, there's amazing initiatives for cycling, like let's say in cities like Mexico City. Um, but I think in cities, other cities in South America and Central and South America. Um, but I think what I think gets neglected is for thinking about comparisons, or what like lessons cities in India can learn from, what cities they can learn from elsewhere. I think Japanese cities are actually one potential source of interesting comparativeness, because so let's say, and this is what Rahul Srivastav and Matthias Ekanove of Herbs often discuss. They have
yeah,
shown really interesting comparisons between Tokyo residential streets and Mumbai streets and show the surprising similarities between two cities that are very rarely seen. Most people think that they have nothing in common, but they show actually that there is a lot potentially in common if you look at them in a certain way, especially in terms of the small on residential streets. Both cities have small shops that spill out into the roadside, and are often have streets in which the side of the road is often blurred and heavily used by people walking and doing other activities. And that might be surprising for listeners. People associate Japanese cities as being highly regulated, um, as opposed to Indian cities. But the key lesson that Japanese cities offers is that there is no on-street parking allowed. And that's what opens up so many neighborhoods in cities like Tokyo, especially residential areas, that make them very cycling and walking friendly. And the reason is not because that there is this very fancy infrastructure or beautiful, there's basically no bicycle lane. But the reason that it's so friendly is because there's no on-street parking. So it's just very creative, kind of a different approach that I think would work. I think it's more likely to work in Indian contexts.
Yeah. It's really interesting to like see how one change can bring a lot of change in the
Yeah,
surrounding environment.
yeah.
And to just sum up the conversation that we have, in what ways could you tell the social and political discourse around cycling in Mumbai inform global discussions on urban sustainability?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a big one. That's good. Yeah, so um no, I mean that's a good way to end it as well. I mean, first, that cycling happens in surprising places.
Yeah,
That I mean, there's just the in the like just we need to evaluate cities and their cyclability. We need new rubrics. We cannot only focus on what has been designed for or what is the policy, because there has been very little to nothing designed for cycling. The policies are entirely car oriented, and yet there is these incredible vibrant cycling communities and practices in the city. Okay, and secondly, there are elements of the city that make cycling relatively comfortable and safe. I'm not saying it's perfect. There's definitely a huge space for improvement, and not everyone would necessarily feel comfortable cycling in Mumbai, but there are actually many surprising ways cycling fits into the urban fabric, and that other cities can learn from. So in terms of the heterogeneous use of the street,
yeah,
heterogeneous kind of vehicles, the use of the vibrant use of the side of the road, for instance. Um, and then just the many different cycling subcultures in terms of like the practical ways cycling is used for utility purposes, which I document in the book, could also be important lessons for other cities as well.
what are the lessons that you think students should learn from this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for asking that. I wrote this book I wanted undergrad students. Like I think the intended audience were people first were I wanted undergrad students to be able to understand and read the book. So that's why whenever I use jargon like the word automobility, I explained it. And so that's one thing. So, and also the other audiences included, transportation people in advocacy world and planners and designers, and as well as anthropologists. So I did not want just like my like people like in my small subset of scholarly communities to understand it. I wanted a larger audience to understand it as well, but while also acknowledging ultimately it is an academic book. Like I get that too.
Yeah,
Um, but in terms of your question about like lessons for students, I mean, I teach ethnographic methods a lot and field methods and writing. And so when I wrote this book while I was teaching those courses, and I would often tell myself, like, I've got to practice what I preach.
yeah,
I need to write the book that I'm telling everyone that they should be doing. So I hope I came close to that. I don't know. So in terms of like one was readability, like I tell people like and ethnographics, the importance of the story of ethnographic detail, that I always tell students like you have to have like that's what anthropologists do. Like we do field work and we write ethnography, and that's got to be the core of it. So that's one thing is I tried to implement in the text. Secondly, um, that I think we need to really think about what a respectful relationship to people we're interviewing and researching, what that actually looks like. So for me, it means not like not being obviously not, I don't want to be critical of people. I don't want to like have a sense of like I am superior to people I'm writing about, or a sense that like I'm somehow as an anthropologist outside of the system that I'm describing. These are all that I don't, this is what I feel like the problems ethnographies often fall in, is that like I'm describing this world and somehow I'm outside of that. No, I'm implicated, I'm part of this. I'm not better than anyone I'm writing about. And then so by the question of respect means just highlighting that people have really interesting ideas about cycling. So I'm not just like mining information and taking data, but actually I'm trying to carefully represent their conceptual framework, how people are understanding cycling or how understanding the city.
Thank you so much for this conversation with me and giving your time and just discussing it as on one-on-one basis. So it's really wonderful.
No, you're so welcome. I really enjoyed this conversation.